Um, I've got so many questions for you because I watched if the esteemed audience is curious, you've got an entire workshop that's online. I'll link to it in the show notes where you go through and you break down how you write your scenes, what are the scene types. In fact, before we start talking ghosts and think about land and this thing, because I know you lived in a haunted house, tease. Uh,
Yes.
you've got some very important, crucial tips about writing strong scenes. Again, there's a whole lot of our workshop, but what are the essential elements of a scene? What can you give us just a little taste for free?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think what most writers struggle with, especially early on, and what keeps you from getting published is that your scene like has one function, right? So and because you're not really sure what a scene is. I think when I started, you're kind of like, okay, there's a scenario I'm putting them in, but what is this really supposed to do? So it's sort of identifying like what's the function of the scene, but also thinking like, how can I have multiple functions for every scene? So I'm always looking at when I'm outlining, the first thing I look at is what are my subplots and my plot? Like, what's my main plot? And then I kind of come up with, well, here's some ideas for scenes that kind of go with that main plot. But what are the other subplots that I'm sort of looking into? So whether that's like a romantic thing, or whether that's like a relationship between a parent and a child, or like the side mystery people are taking care of, I label those all out. And then I think like, okay, I have these scenes where here's what the general order, the logical order of the first plot, the main plot is. Now, how can I fold in all of these subplots so that every single scene I'm addressing several things at once? And I'm also looking at what kind of conflict is in the scene. So you need to identify like, is this scene primarily sort of like a physical conflict where they're in a state of danger and they're trying to escape something, or is it an internal conflict where they're addressing something internally, some feeling they have, some moral quandary they need to address? And I'm trying to make sure that I have at least one or the other of those in every scene. And where I can, I'm putting both those things in. And you don't want to overcomplicate, because there is that danger too of overcomplicating every single scene. But I do think most people, when they're starting out, the scenes are too simplistic and they don't do enough. And people are just sort of wandering around, but not having anything really to do. And the more conflict that you can put in there, the more you give them the meat to react, to act, to do things that are going to help propel the scene forward and make it interesting. Um, so I would say, like, you're looking at what setting is going to make this the most interesting scene possible. So how can I up that? How sitting at breakfast, eating breakfast, that's not like a very compelling thing unless you put something in there that's really surprising, right? So you're just recognizing like the setting's going to lend itself to the scene. So I'm either going to have to make it really original and escapist in some way, or if it's a very mundane thing, how do I twist it so it doesn't feel mundane? So I'm looking at that piece, that I'm looking at of the characters that are in the scene. How am I furthering each of those characters somehow? I'm giving some little tidbit of revelation of who this person is in the way that they're reacting to the situation or talking to the other person in this scene. So I'm breaking that down. So I will list like, here's all the characters. Here's the things that they're coming into the scene with. Like even my little sub characters, like what is their goal in this moment? What are they trying to do? What are they thinking? And I'm kind of putting myself in each head and then writing notes for myself, like, okay, these are the things that they would have to say, and these are the things that maybe they're doing. But for me, it is multitasking a scene. So how many things can happen, and how late can I come into that scene so that there's not a lot of preamble, like where I'm just explaining a lot of backstory type stuff before the action takes place. So how can I start with action and have you sort of surmise what's going on through that action and through the characters' observation of the setting and what's happening. So my advice would be, when you're writing, of course, I'm going to be a proponent of outlining, because I think it's really important to be able to do that. Because I feel like it's building a house. So if you're not outlining, you're trying to build that house and put up everything, the drywall, the electrical, all of that stuff in your head in real time. And I can't do that. There's no way. My brain doesn't work that way. So if I outline, at least I have the scaffolding, I have the bones, the structure, and then I can flesh that out um, more easily, because I've already sort of laid that out in writing next to me. So I put the little outline next to me and I'm like, okay, here's what they're doing. Now I can add like the language and sort of whatever those little things are easier, because I'm not having to think of five things at one time as I'm writing in real time. But I think also people who pants, really their rough draft is an outline. It is their brain dumping everything they need to know onto the paper. It's just not in outline form. So it's just a more unstructured way of putting together an outline than what I do. Mine is extremely structured, but I'm perfectionistic. And if I don't do that, I crumple. I crumple at a blank page. I need that like guide. But that's my advice for setting is that literally for scene setting and for scene building is make sure you're multitasking that scene so that you are making it do double and triple duty in terms of your plots and your subplots and your character development.
So your outline sounds like is detailed enough that it's almost a first draft.
It kind of is a first draft in a way. Like sometimes I feel like, did I rewrite the scene? It's because I had, pages for each scene of what they were doing in bullet points. Like, okay, they're doing this, 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 and this. So it is. It's just a different way. It's me tricking myself into a rough draft because every writer's different. I have a heavy amount of perfectionism, which is fear. Because I'm the writer who writes in fear, right? I develop stories in fear and then I write in fear. But I write that so I trick myself into being like, okay, I can do this because when I'm writing a rough draft, the sound of it, and that's the only way I can describe it is the sound of it, me typing it and hearing those words in my head, it sounds horrendous. Like, it just sounds terrible to me. I'm like, this is not singing. There's no music to what I'm writing. This is just dry. And so if I have like that sort of guideline, I can trick myself into it and I free up my brain to be able to think of the stuff that will make it sound better to me because I already have sort of the mundane stuff taken care of somewhat. So
that might be the most brilliant argument for plotting ahead of time I've ever heard because you take the pressure off the first time because it's not a first draft. God, no, it's an outline.
Exactly.
So off that way, and then when you go to write your first draft, well, you're not writing from nothing. You already know what's going to happen. You know what's going to be said. So the pressure's off there. Amy Christie Parker, you might have convinced me to change the way I work. That's
I'll take it. I know this is like if I have any kind of like Bible thumping things, it's outlining. This would be the equivalent of that for me. I'm like, it's great.
You might burn in hell, you might not. I don't care. But let me get your story straightened out. Let's do an outline.
The story's gonna work.